A constable calls. His bicycle stood at the windowsill, the rubber cowl of a mud splasher skirting the front mudguard, its fat black handle grips heating in sunlight, the spud of the dynamo gleaming and cocked back, the pedal treads hanging relieved of the boot of the law. His cap was upside down on the floor next his chair. The line of its pressure ran like a bevel in his slightly sweating hair. He had unstrapped the heavy ledger, and my father was making tillage returns in acres, roods, and perches. Arithmetic and fear. I sat staring at the polished holster with its buttoned flap, the braid cord looped into the revolver butt. Any other root crops, mangolds, marrow stems, anything like that? No. But was there not a line of turnips where the seed ran out in the potato field? I assumed small guilts and sat imagining the black hole in the barracks. He stood up, shifted the baton case further round on his belt, closed the Domesday book, fitted his cap back with two hands, and looked at me as he said goodbye. A shadow bobbed in the window. He was snapping the carrier's spring over the ledger. His boot pushed off and the bicycle ticked, ticked, ticked. Okay, so it's a poem about the difference between young and an impression of something when you're a very young child, and Heaney remembers this. He remembers the constable. The constable this would have been, if Heaney was born in 1939, this would have been maybe the end of the 1940s, the early 50s. So Heaney was quite a young child, and the constable comes to the house, to their farm, basically to see what is his father growing in order to get tax. And make a record of taxes. That's exactly what the constable is doing. The Heeneys would have been Catholics. The man who came would have been a Protestant. So there's a clash of tradition here. Now, it's not as if there's any aggression in the poem, but there is a curtness, and it's plain that these two men are not here to have small talk. As well as that, what you find throughout the whole poem, you find images that could be of control and of coercion and potentially of bombs and weapons. So we'll have a look at some of those. You get things like the rubber cowl. Well, a cowl is simply just a mud. It's the rubber of the mud splasher to stop the mud splashing up from the wheels and hitting the person in the face. No big deal, but rubber tends to be sort of like armour. You get the fat black handle grips here. Everything is in order. Everything is larger than life. Heating in sunlight. The spud of the dynamo. Now, the way he describes the dynamo is gleaming and cocked back. Usually when you have something that's cocked back, you think that it's to do with a weapon. Well, a dynamo is this thing here, and I don't know if you can see that. A dynamo, very simply, is a little mechanism here. It's a wheel on top of it. So as the wheel goes, this wheel here turns, and what it does is it lights the light. Ingenious things, but it's basically there to do it. But he's described it here as the dynamo gleaming and cocked back, almost like a weapon. As well as that, when he describes here the pedal treads hanging relieved of the boot of the law, the man's boot is heavy. So even though I've got a picture of quite, fairly thin constables in the three pictures that I've chosen here, you get the sense that maybe this man was quite heavy, but there's heavy in the other sense. Heavy as in, these are people who are not afraid to assert their authority. The cap was upside down. He's not a very attractive man. He's slightly sweating. So the cap was upside down. I read in the notes he wasn't offered water. Well, it doesn't say that he was offered water, but there's no sense of friendliness here. He had unstrapped the heavy ledger. Again, everything about this man is heavy and larger than life, from the fat black grips to the heavy boot of the law to the heavy ledger. Okay, so it was vital that Heaney's father filled out all of the returns, all of the crops that he was actually growing, and not to lie. What he was doing there, tillage returns is what it says there, in acres, roods, and perches. Now, the sizes, I didn't look them up for this, but the sizes are important because acre is a relatively large size. It's smaller than a hectare. roods and perches would be really quite small. So this control, they didn't allow you to have anything extra for yourself. They had to know about absolutely everything. It was a top-down, authoritarian way of doing it. Okay, so the fact that they used perches, it would be like looking for the millimeters when you're dealing with meters. And for the boy Heaney, it's arithmetic and fear. They're counting up everything, and he is frightened. He sat staring at the polished holster, so his weapon. Everything, again, as I said, is neat and an ordered buttoned flap. Everything is neat and in order. The buttoned flap, the braid cord looped into the revolver butt. This is a man who's in control. And the dialogue between the two men is very, very minimal. Any other root crops, mangolds, marrow stems, anything like that? And the dad's answer is simply no. Just for this is a mangold. So that's what a mangold looked like. So a sort of somewhere between a turnip and a spud. I'm sure the botanists would be given it, but that's what it is. So his father answers no, but Heaney, as the child, knows that that's not quite true, because was there not a line of turnips where the seed ran out in the potato field? So Heaney knows that his father's not being totally truthful. It's not a huge lie, but it's enough to make the child Heaney scared. I assumed small guilts. In other words, Heaney, as a boy, he took all of this guilt upon himself, and he sat imagining, even as a child, he was able to imagine the black hole in the barracks, the jail where they would throw his father or him for failing to tell the truth. He stands up, and if we look at the paraphernalia that he carries, again, it's a baton case further round on his belt. Well, a baton used for hitting people there's a baton there in this particular picture. Sorry, there we go. So, there. Well, you know what a baton is. Used to hit people, like a truncheon. Okay. Then you get this image here of further... yes, he fitted his cap back with his two hands. He looked at me as he said goodbye. Yeah. He closed the Domesday Book. Now, of course, you can read that as Doomsday Book, as in the Book of Judgment that you might find in some apocalyptic text like the last book of the Bible, Revelation. So that could be that. But the Domesday Book was an actual real book from the 11th century, 1084, William the Conqueror. And basically he wanted a census of who was on the land, what they were growing and what they were doing with the land in order to get taxes. And there's either it's a facsimile or it's the real thing, but that's what it looks like there. And it literally had the people who were growing and what they were doing. And if you didn't tell the truth, obviously you were in big trouble. To make matters worse, adults and children, there's always a tension there anyway. He looked at me as he said goodbye. That could have been a very friendly greeting, but for the young, or not a greeting, but a farewell, but for the young Heaney, it's not, he doesn't see it as friendly because he's terrified of this man. I'm actually missing a line there, but the man is described as a shadow bobbed in the window. He was again snapping the carrier shut. And the last two lines that are missing there, his boot pushed off and the bicycle ticked, ticked, ticked. That, obviously, tick, 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 it's connotations of a bomb. And again, more connotations of control and power. Okay, so that is, I only included this because the spring of the carrier at the back of it is incredibly powerful. So all of this is about control and Protestant control and Catholic people being, rightly scared of the heavy boot of the law. That's a Constable Calls.